Hi, this is Aaron Marshall with Ratio Christi here at UNC Wilmington. Today we wanted to look at what is a classical apologetics argument for Christianity. In other words, how do we classically get to Christianity being true? And there's lots of different ways that you can do apologetics. There's presuppositionalism, there's evidentialism, and maybe in future videos we can talk about the differences between a classical apologetics argument and those. But today we wanted to just tell you what is a classical apologetics argument. And a classical argument starts with this. We start with the nature of truth. In other words, what is truth? Is reality knowable? Can you know truth? And we would say the answer obviously is yes, but we need to actually flesh that out, and we need to describe why that is the case. The reason that we start with that, with these sort of philosophical foundations, including the law of non-contradiction and some of the other logical things that I think we've gone over in previous videos, is because if I give you good arguments for God's existence, or if I give you good arguments that you can trust the Bible, and your reply to me is simply, well, that's just your truth. You know, what's true for you is true for you. What's true for me is true for me. Then we haven't gained any ground in our argument. So we have to first start off with the idea that truth is absolute. And we've talked about that in previous videos. But what is truth is such an important foundational question. And if truth is absolute, then we can move on to these other questions. We have to settle that first. And it's very important to understand in a classical apologetics argument that we have to settle these first things before we move on to the next thing. Then we settle the next thing before we move over to the last thing. So if we can settle what truth is in these philosophical foundations, then in a classical apologetics argument, we move on to the next important piece, which is, does God exist? Okay, then in this part of the argument, we would give you multiple arguments to show that God does exist. Okay, so truth exists, and then God exists. Why do we go to this part first and not to Christianity? Because it seems like that if you're a thoroughgoing naturalist, if you believe in materialism, if you don't believe God exists, and I just go straight to evidence for the resurrection, and I show you good reason to believe that Jesus actually did rise from the dead, it seems like you would say, well, I guess people do rise from the dead naturalistically. It doesn't follow that because Jesus rose from the dead, therefore God exists. That's why in a classical apologetics argument, we want to show you epistemologically how you come to know things, that you actually live in a theistic world, a world in which God does exist. So we start with truth, then we move to the fact that God exists, and then finally in our third step, we then look at the truth claims of Christianity. Can we trust the Bible? And ultimately, what are the claims of the Bible? Most importantly, who was the person of Jesus Christ? Was he who he claimed to be, God? And did he prove it in his death and in his resurrection? And if those things are true, then Christianity is true. So in a classical Christian apologetics argument, we start with truth and other philosophical foundations. We then move to the arguments for God's existence. And then finally we move to the truth claims of Christianity. And those three steps are very important, each step having to be sort of settled before we move on to the next step. So I hope this helps you understand a little bit better what a classical argument, a classical apologetic argument is for Christianity. And again, in future videos, we'll walk through each of these steps and each of these parts of the classical apologetics argument. Remember, at Ratio Christi at UNC Wilmington, we are always challenging you to ask good questions, but also to seek good answers.